This video will cover 1. What is a framework? 2. When would you use one? And 3. Some examples of them. A web framework is anything that lets you build a web app. So, for example, a website, an on-screen calculator, or a SQL database that keeps track of all of your transactions. A framework can be thought of as a skeleton that you can add to, sort of like how different cars are built on top of different chassis. So once you have the chassis, that's the framework, and then you can decide what to build on top of it, whether it's a truck, an SUV, etc. So the web framework gives you a frame to build around. Hi, I'm Walt, one of Linode's developer advocates. We have a lot to cover in this video, so subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos like this, and let's get started. All of the popular languages all have web frameworks. For example, JavaScript has 2 popular frameworks called React and Node. React, which was created by Facebook, uses a JSX syntax, which is just Facebook's version of JavaScript. And this allows you to put everything into components. So let's look at this web page. This would be a component, and this would be a component, etc. Therefore, if you wanted to have 20 of these buttons on one page, then you simply put this code down 20 times. It's similar to using shortcodes in WordPress. As for Node, which was created by Ryan Dahl, it allows you to run JavaScript on the back end. Because what if you want to store data on the back end somewhere, like in a database? Well, that's Node. And that's one way to use a web framework. Which takes me to the why would you even use a framework? Because 1, frameworks are designed to scale, so you don't have to always restructure your code every time you grow. 2, web frameworks make things simple. You don't have to build the car chassis every single time. You would just start with the template. And 3, web frameworks not only make things simple, but they also make things easier, because chances are that someone has already developed an app or a template that does what you already need it to do. For example, I could try and design my own virtual machine server from scratch, but it would be easier to just rent a Linode for $5 per month. And then in that Linode server, I could build my own CMS from scratch, line by line. But again, it would be easier, faster, and more secure to just use the WordPress one-click install for my CMS. So it doesn't just stop there. You have themes, plugins, and so much more. Why build these things if someone already made it and you can just drop it in? The thing is that frameworks force you to work around the structure. So it sort of standardizes the way that apps are created. Let's take another example, a hotel booking website. In this example, there would be a lot to keep track of, allowing new customers to create a profile, reviews, pulling hotel images from different APIs, e-commerce, maps and virtual tours, and so much more. It's perfectly fine to create this website entirely from scratch by making everything yourself, from the index HTML file, the backend database, and even the engine for the 3D virtual tours. But here's another option. Just use a framework, which is sort of like a template, and then build on top of that. The purpose of web frameworks is simply so you don't have to write things from scratch. For example, I'm not a security expert, so I would use a web framework so that I don't have to worry about my website having any security vulnerabilities. This solution would be faster, more affordable, and better in almost every way than if I were to do it myself. There's also another thing called a library, which can extend this even further. I'll cover that in my next video. So let's take another example. If you created a website from scratch, then you need to build the index.html, session files, and everything yourself. But what if you were a web developer and you had to create a new website every few days for your clients? Well, just use a framework. It's sort of like a template, and then do your customizations on top of that. The web framework is the piece that sits between your program and the internet. And also take note, web frameworks are sometimes called web application frameworks. They're the same thing. And what you should know is that they're a software suite that helps develop web services, web resources, and web APIs. So let's call back to the stack video, which was the mean and MERN stack. They're tech stacks, and the R in MERN stands for React. And remember, that's a web framework, and another web framework example is Angular made by Google. You also have front-end frameworks like Bootstrap and Foundation. And you have back-end frameworks like Django, Vue.js, and Ruby on Rails. And Ruby on Rails is just Ruby that allows you to run Ruby on the back end. So let's recap. 1. The web framework is the piece that sits between your program and the internet. 2. Frameworks are like a chassis for a car. It's a frame or the foundation that gives you an outline to build on top of it. You can then customize any tires, seats, roof, doors, or anything that you want on top of that. But it gives you a standardized place to start from. So when you're building things, you pretty much have 3 options. You can build everything yourself, line by line, or you can start with a framework and then customize and build things line by line on top of that framework, or you can just keep building things using frameworks and what are called libraries, which we'll talk more about libraries in the next video. And number 3, popular languages like Python, JavaScript, and PostgreSQL have web frameworks. For example, JavaScript has 2 popular frameworks called React and Node, and that's it. Next week, we'll be extending this video to talk about what's the difference between libraries and frameworks. In that video, we'll talk about who calls the method and how you can use a library whenever you want, whereas the framework tells you how things are going to be. More about that in the next video. So leave a comment below if you have any questions about this. And remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of new episodes.